If you want to stop artificial intelligence from expanding too fast and, consuming all the local resources, you don't actually need to write a brand new, highly complex tech law. You can actually just weaponize a Dirt Management Act from 1976.
Right, which is just wild to think about.
It really is. Welcome to this deep dive into Congress in context, where we basically take the massive stack of the congressional record. And today, we are looking specifically at July 23, 2026, and we distill the actual mechanics of what the legislative branch is doing.
Yeah, the goal here is to decode the structural moves, right?
Yeah.
Bypassing all the partisan noise on cable news to figure out exactly how these decisions are built from the ground up.
Exactly. Because if you just read the headlines, you're only hearing the shouting. So we want to, look at the actual blueprints. But real quick, just a brief housekeeping note before we jump in. To you listening right now, this is a completely independent project.
Yep, completely independent.
And keeping this ad-free civic education resource sustainable, well, it relies entirely on you. So if you find value in understanding these mechanics, you can help support our production infrastructure by using the Buy Me a Coffee link right there in your app show notes.
It genuinely keeps the servers running. We really appreciate everyone who pitches in.
We really do. Okay, so for today's thematic journey, we are looking at how Congress structurally manages the economic stability of disabled Americans, the tension over war powers, and that scramble to regulate the physical footprint of AI. So let's start with the most intensely debated bill of the session.
Right. This is H.R. 8884.
Yeah, the Removing Barriers to Work for Disabled Americans Act, which was sponsored by Representative Austin Scott. This passed the House 232 to 188. And it focuses mechanically on the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, or SSDI.
Right. So the structural core of this bill revolves around something called demonstration authority. This bill essentially extends the Social Security Administration's ability to run these experimental work programs through December 31st, 2031.
Okay, and what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it waives certain standard compliance requirements. Basically, it allows the SSA to test out different rules regarding how much money a disabled person can earn without automatically losing their federal benefits.
Okay, so the proponents of the bill, like Representative Jason Smith and Representative Scott, they argue this legislation is designed to mechanically eliminate the benefit cliff.
Yeah, the benefit cliff is a huge structural issue.
Right. And Representative Scott actually shared a really specific story on the floor about a combat-wounded Purple Heart veteran. And this veteran wanted to take on just a few extra hours at his job, but couldn't because of how the system's currently designed.
Which is incredibly frustrating for people trying to re-enter the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at the current SSDI income limit like a financial tripwire.
Yeah.
You earn literally $1 single over that statutory limit, and the system mechanically triggers a total loss of your benefits.
Exactly. It's entirely binary. The tripwire does not care if you earned $1 over the limit or, $10,000 over the limit. The benefit just ceases.
Right.
And as our proponents point out, a disabled individual might want the dignity and the routine of going back to work, but those rigid income limits create the severe disincentive to even try.
So mechanically, H.R. 8884 mandates that participating in these new work experiments will not reduce an individual's total income.
Total income, right?
Right, which sounds great on the surface. But opponents, like Representative Judy Chu and Representative Danny Davis, point out a structural lack of guardrails in that exact text. They argue that guaranteeing a person's total income won't drop is entirely different from guaranteeing their actual SSA-based benefit won't drop.
Yeah, the wording there is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
So I have to ask, does this bill actually disarm that financial tripwire, or does the statutory language just, change where the tripwire is hidden?
Well, let's unpack the math on the opponent's argument because it shows why they're so concerned. Imagine you earn $500 at a new part-time job.
Okay.
Under these experimental rules, the SSA could theoretically just reduce your monthly disability check by that exact same $500.
Oh, wow. So your total income hasn't actually changed.
Exactly. Your bottom line is the same as it was before you took the job. But opponents point out that this effectively means you're working those part-time hours for free.
Right.
And structurally, it provides a legal avenue for the federal government to just reduce its overall outlays.
Which brings up a massive piece of historical context that Representative Chu noted during the debate. She pointed out that past administrations have actually proposed utilizing this exact kind of demonstration authority to shrink the federal budget.
Yeah, she specifically brought up the first Trump administration proposing to use demonstration authority to cut disability benefits by roughly $50 billion over 10 years.
$50 billion.
Right, so when you look at that historical context, you begin to understand why this specific legislative wording is so heavily scrutinized by both sides.
Right, the proponents see the total income protection as this safe harbor, while the opponents look at that exact same phrasing and see a structural loophole for budget reduction. And there's actually another layer to the opposition's argument. The bill requires these experiments to be funded from the SSA's customer service operating budget rather than from the actual SSDI trust funds.
And that's a huge mechanical issue because the SSA is already facing severe staffing shortages.
Right.
So funding these experiments out of the operating budget means diverting resources away from, answering phones, processing routine claims, and handling appeals. Opponents argue that you're intentionally compounding a customer service bottleneck.
Yeah, and that dynamic, using a subtle phrase like total income or a back-end budget maneuver to achieve a policy shift, is classic legislative workaround. Lawmakers are always searching for those mechanisms. And we actually see that same structural tension when we look at war powers.
Oh, absolutely. The tension between the executive and legislative branches over military deployment is as old as the Constitution itself.
Right, so let's shift to H.Con.Res 89. This is a war powers resolution directing the president to remove U.S. armed forces from hostilities with Iran.
And this one passed the House 214 to 208, a very tight vote.
Extremely tight. And the floor speeches were incredibly somber. Representative Madeline Dean of Pennsylvania actually listed the names of 4 fallen troops. Private First Class Isabel Gonzalez, First Lieutenant Tyler James Fian, Sergeant Angel Rampersad, and Sergeant Michael Emmanuel Swinton. She characterized the deployment mechanically as an ill-conceived war.
Yeah, and over in the Senate, Senator Tim Sheehy of Montana gave this highly detailed speech about the dignified return of remains process at Dover Air Force Base.
It's a heavy process.
It really is.
Oh, yeah.
He described the mechanics of it, the quiet tarmac, the flag-draped transfer cases, and it grounded a very abstract constitutional debate in this stark physical reality.
And then Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland invoked the framers of the Constitution. He emphasized that structurally the power of war and peace just cannot rest with one individual. The framers explicitly gave Congress the power of the purse to fund the military, so Congress should be the one to declare war.
Right. It's a structural safeguard.
Exactly. I kind of liken this war powers resolution to a corporate board of directors pulling the emergency brake on a CEO's rogue project.
That's a good analogy.
Right. Like the CEO runs the day-to-day, but the board tries to forcefully shut it down.
Yeah.
But mechanically speaking, how often does this emergency brake actually force a withdrawal versus just serving as a formal statement of disapproval?
Well, that gets right to the heart of the separation of powers. So the Constitution splits this right down the middle. Article 2 makes the president the commander-in-chief with operational command, but Article 1 gives Congress the power to declare war and the power of the purse.
Right.
So the 1973 War Powers Resolution was Congress trying to codify a method to reclaim that authority. Specifically, we're looking at Section 5C today.
And Section 5C is the mechanism that allows Congress to direct the removal of troops without a formal declaration of war, right?
Yes. But there's a massive structural catch. It's a concurrent resolution. Meaning it requires passage by both the House and the Senate, but it does not go to the president's desk for a signature or a veto.
So they bypass the veto completely.
Exactly. Congress designed it that way intentionally to force the president's hand, but because of a 1983 Supreme Court ruling about the legislative veto, the actual legal binding force of a concurrent resolution is highly contested.
So presidents just push back.
Historically, yes, presidents of both parties have argued it infringes on their constitutional authority.
Right, so if this Iran resolution passes the House and the Senate, the president might just structurally ignore it and say, I'm the commander-in-chief, the troops stay.
Exactly, but it still profoundly changes the political landscape. It signals that the commander-in-chief has lost legislative backing, and it usually sets the stage for Congress to use its ultimate structural weapon.
The power of the purse. If they can't hit the brakes directly, they just cut the fuel line.
Yep. They simply refuse to pass the defense appropriations needed to buy the ammunition and pay the troops.
And we are seeing Congress search for these alternative structural levers everywhere right now. which actually brings us perfectly to a completely different jurisdictional battleground, which is the rapid physical expansion of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this is a fascinating area where Congress is trying to adapt these really analog laws to a digital revolution.
We saw a flurry of AI bills introduced in this session. There's SFF 117 establishing consumer transparency for chatbots, and SFF 105 about the applicability of antitrust laws to AI frontier model risks. But one that really stands out structurally is H.R. 9939, sponsored by Representative Rashida Tlaib.
Right, the bill prohibiting AI data centers on federal land.
Exactly. Lawmakers are realizing that AI requires massive physical infrastructure. It's not just code in the cloud. And Senator Bernie Sanders gave a speech specifically warning about the physical mechanics of this. He pointed out the massive drain data centers have on local power and water grids.
Because they run incredibly hot and need industrial cooling.
Right. And he also touched on the social impact of human beings interacting mostly with screens rather than each other. But looking at H.R. 9939, this federal land ban, it kind of feels like trying to install seat belts in a car that's already driving down the highway at 200 miles per hour.
Yeah, the tech is just moving so fast.
So are bills like this actually addressing the root structural issues of AI, or are they just legislative speed bumps?
Well, they don't address the root software issues. But refusing to allow physical construction on federal land is a highly effective mechanical speed bump. Congress is struggling to define things like neural networks and generative models. Writing new antitrust frameworks for that takes years.
Do they turn to the laws they already have?
Exactly. They have this massive framework for land use, primarily the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976.
The Dirt Management Act from the intro.
Right, exactly. The Bureau of Land Management controls vast tracts of land, especially out west where tech companies want to build because it's cheap and near power grids. By tying AI regulation to those land permits, Congress is using existing mechanics to artificially throttle tech expansion.
So if a company can't get the permit to build a physical water-cooled data center, they can't process the data as quickly.
Right. It basically buys the legislative branch time to build the larger structural frameworks around privacy and antitrust.
That's incredible. They are using a 1976 land use tool to physically regulate a 2026 digital frontier.
You use the levers you have, right? Not
Yeah.
the ones you wish you had.
Right. And, so much of what we've unpacked today involves really deep friction. Disability funding battles, constitutional showdowns over war powers, throttling tech expansion. But when you flip through the rest of the record from July 23rd, you find these completely different, almost routine structural items that keep the machinery running.
Yeah, the basic maintenance of government.
Right, like S4784, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027. This massive procedural action included 8 bipartisan amendments for the Air National Guard. We also saw an oversight update from Representative Al Green of Texas.
This was regarding ICE, right?
Yes. Following the death of a civilian named Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, Representative Green announced that Immigration and Customs Enforcement will be implementing body cameras within 60 days to increase structural accountability.
Which is an example of the oversight machinery working. A tragedy occurs, and Congress forces an agency to adopt transparency protocols on a strict timeline.
Exactly. But then right next to that, you have these purely cultural resolutions. We saw the introduction of S5123 designating Lunar Landing Day and SRS 813 establishing a National Day of the American Cowboy.
The Cowboy Resolution, yeah.
And I have to push back on this a little bit because passing a National Cowboy Day resolution seems mechanically trivial when you place it next to a War Powers resolution. Why does Congress spend floor time on these symbolic things when the calendar is supposedly so packed?
I know, it's so easy to dismiss them as just fluff. But mechanically, these resolutions act as the connective tissue of Congress.
Connective tissue.
Yeah. Think about the structural environment these lawmakers are in. It is deeply polarized and antagonistic. If 2 representatives spend 6 months arguing over military deployments, they're going to view each other as permanent enemies.
And the friction would just cause the whole system to seize up.
Exactly. So these symbolic resolutions allow them to build bipartisan voting habits on low-stakes issues. A Democrat and a Republican co-sponsoring National Cowboy Day means their chiefs of staff have to email each other. The lawmakers have to share resources and publicly agree on something.
So it's building muscle memory for agreement.
Yes. It establishes functional relationships because later, when they're negotiating a high-stakes bill like the NDAA, they actually have open channels of communication. It's mechanically necessary to keep those channels open. The trivial bills are the lubricant for the entire engine.
Wow, okay. That completely changes how I'll view those calendar items going forward. Well, that brings us to the end of today's deep dive into the congressional record. Thank you to you, the listener, for joining us to decode this underlying architecture. And as a reminder, keeping this resource sustainable relies on you. So if you valued this breakdown, please use the Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description.
And we always want you to take this knowledge and apply it.
Right, so here are your actionable steps. If you want to read the exact text of H.R. 8884 or the Iran War Powers Resolution, you can visit congress.gov. And to participate beyond just voting, look up your specific House and Senate representatives' office numbers. Call them. Express your views on how AI data centers should be regulated or how SSDI benefits should be structurally designed.
Staffers log every call, and those data points directly influence voting mechanics.
Also, keep an eye out for a procedural vote coming up. The Senate has a scheduled cloture vote on Monday, July 27, 2026, regarding Walter Clayton's nomination for Director of National Intelligence.
And before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final mechanical puzzle from this session's material.
Oh, lay it on us.
So we saw 2 other bills introduced. S11175, altering population tiers for local government funding limits, and S4D41, the Boosting Housing Supply Through Small Businesses Act.
Which definitely do not sound like front-page news.
They're not. But I want you to ponder this. How might subtle mechanical changes to federal funding formulas and interagency coordination quietly yet fundamentally reshape the demographics and housing availability of small-town America?
You pull a tiny lever in Washington.
And the structure of a small town changes without a single national headline. It's something to think about.
The gears are always turning. Until next time, keep looking deeper.